everybody. How we doing? Okay. Listen, well, my name's Tyler, and I come from all the way from the Cabot campus. Where are we at, Cabot? There we are. Listen, we're diving right in, because here's the thing. There has been one question that has kind of surrounded Winterchill this year. And this is maybe a question that you've seen, maybe we've posted on Instagram, or maybe you have even been asked this question to some degree, but there's this one question that carries a lot of weight. There's a lot of things that go around this question. So I'm gonna ask it to you. Are you ready? Like, that's the question. Are you ready? No. Like, you just sang a song, the bridge just proclaimed that, man, we're ready. We are ready for you, God. We're ready. And so I'm just going to ask you from the outset of this weekend, students, are you ready? All right. Here's the deal. We're going to be in Exodus 32 tonight. We're going to be there, and I'm going to kind of launch into this by telling you a story about when I was in junior high. Anybody we're all out of junior high, praise the Lord, right? Was anybody awkward in junior high? All right. Well, back then for me, I had a buddy. He was my best good buddy. He was my best pal. His name was Ethan. And his name still is Ethan. He's still here. But anyways, Ethan was my best good buddy, but let me tell you, we were horrible for each other. You know what I'm saying? Like, we would get into so much trouble, so much mischief, so many things I don't even like talking about today. Those are the things that we did. We caused so much pain and tribulation for a lot of people, but we were best friends. And so not only were we best friends, not only were we horrible for each other, but we were also in a band. Why are you guys laughing at me? Like, gosh darn. Here's the deal. Like, we were in a band, and we were so popular. I mean, we were legit in a very small part of the world, specifically the Holy Souls Catholic School, junior high. But we were the only band, but we were the most popular band. And we had a gig one time. Like, we played, we closed out a talent show, so it's kind of a big deal. That's a different story for a different time, but we did play a talent show. We had a photo shoot. Well, we had somebody take a picture of us once. And so we were on our way into like the pop punk music industry. Like, we were so close to do it. And so we had this picture taken. You want to see my band? All right. That's Ethan Hartzell on the drums, Tyler Kemp on lead guitar and vocals. And so you can for sure take that off immediately, if not sooner. Yeah. And so thank you. Yes. I knew it was going to happen. Thank you, Cameron. Appreciate that. But man, we were legit. I mean, we had a band name. Like, that's the thing that you need in a band, right? Our name was Set 7. I don't know what it meant, but we thought it was cool. So, man, we were my best good buddy. We're in a band. We played a gig. We had we had a photo shoot kind of, and we were just like, we felt like we were so cool. And so this one particular summer, my mom decided that she was going to take the family down to the beach, and she said, Tyler, you can bring a friend with you. I'm like, oh, you know who I'm going to bring? Ethan, like my best good buddy. And she was like, okay. And so we were headed down to Gulf Shores or Orange Beach, wherever it is we were going, and we started like driving in. And when you like go to the beach, you pass those stores, like it's like an Alvin's Island type of thing. They've got like 250,000 like souvenirs, like stuff, and you can get your name. You know what I'm talking about? So you get henna tattoos there. Well, if you go all the way to the back of those shops, there is an airbrush tattoo stand. And so we passed that store and we're like, dude, we've had a gig. We've had a photo shoot. You know what we need now? Merch. All right, so we've got to get some merchandise. We got to get promo. We've got to have a Set 7 t-shirt. This has got to happen. So we lose our minds about this thing. And we tell my mom, like, Mom, listen. This is really important. We can just feel it. We can taste it. We almost have a record deal. We're almost in the pop punk music industry. It's where we want to be. We have to get a shirt. Like, this is what we have to do. And she's like, of course. And so absolutely, we're gonna take you to get a shirt. And so I was like, Mom, can we please get a shirt? She was like, absolutely. I promise you by the end of this trip, by the time that we're through here, like before we go home, we will take you to get a shirt. We promise that we will take you to get a shirt. And we were like, come on, that's awesome. And so like day one happens and she's like, we're not going, we'll go sometime, but we're not going today. We just got here. So day one, we're at the beach, we're hanging out, having a good time. Day two, we don't go. Day three, we don't go. Day four, we still haven't gone. I'm like, hey Mom, this band thing is really kind of taken off for us. We would really, really like to go get these shirts. And she was like, I promise you we're gonna go, but we're not gonna go today. And I'm like, Mom, but listen, like this is a big deal for us. And she's like, look, I promise you, before we leave this trip, we are gonna go get those shirts. I was like, okay. I was like, but I don't wanna bother you, Mom. Even you brought us here. I don't wanna be, I don't wanna disrespect your time. I was like, me and Ethan, we could just go get the shirts ourselves. And she said, absolutely not. It's a weird flex, Mom, but okay. Like, she was like, no, listen, like you, like it's 2 miles away. You've got to cross 6 lanes of traffic. You're 12 years old in a city that you don't know anything about with people you don't know anything about. You cannot go there. By no means will you go there by yourself. So the next day, Ethan and I decided that we're going to go to the store, and we like they go to the beach and we take off and we're going to the store and we walk in and because here's the thing, it's like we just needed like a taste, like you know what I'm saying? Like we just needed a little bit of a glimmer of hope that we were going to get these t-shirts that mattered so much to us. No matter how much my mom promised, it was like we just needed to just at least talk to somebody about making shirts. Like we want to make sure there was enough shirts in supply. We want to make sure they didn't run out of airbrush, materials. Like we just needed to make sure that we had it, right? And so we go to the store, we talk to the guy, and I'm sure we look like some, goons walking in, but we're like, oh man, we've got a band. He's like, I'm sure you do. And I'm like, we're really close to stardom. He's like, right. And so we're walking, we're like, man, talk to us about these shirts. And he's telling us, and we're like, oh man, we need to know how much they are. How much are they? Like $15. Like, oh, sweet. Okay, we got this. All right, so we go back home after we feel settled. We go back to the condo, and they didn't know that we were gone. And so they come in, we're doing dinner. And my mom was like, hey, I just want you guys to know we're so proud that you guys have been so patient and so understanding. And we're like, we get that, And she was like, hey, I know we've said we were going to go. We're going to go tomorrow to get you. And because you have been so good, you've been so patient, we would actually like to pay for the shirts for you. And we're like, oh, Mom, way to be. Like, that's awesome. And she was like, how much are they? And Ethan said, they're $15. And my mom said, how do you know that? And he's like, well, we went today. I asked my mom about that today. I was like, did you know that we went? And she didn't respond. But I was like, dude, how you could have not done that any worse. Like you could have not lied any worse in that situation. How did you let the cat out of the bag? Like, why did you say that? But here's the thing about this silly shirt story. Like the thing about it is that, man, we so badly wanted these things, but we hated waiting. Do you guys hate to wait for stuff? Oh, I hate it. I can't stand it. If there's a YouTube video that's taken longer than 5 seconds to load, I'm done with it. I don't care how bad I wanted to watch it. I'm over it, right? For me, traffic is horrible. Who got stuck in traffic on the way here? I don't want any part of that, okay? Like I will go around traffic. I don't care if I drive an extra 5 miles. I'm gonna get around traffic. Why? Because I hate waiting. I do. And the thing about it is, like when it comes to us waiting, the thing that bothers me the most is that we are at the mercy of somebody else. Like when we're waiting for something, when we're longing for something, we are at the mercy of somebody else. And it's in those moments that in our waiting that we actually just become super impatient. Like, I don't know if you've ever taken the ACT before, but like the moments, like maybe you studied or you prepped, or maybe you're like me and you didn't, but you studied and you're getting ready and you take the test and then you have to what? Wait for the results. And it's like, I want to know what I made. Or maybe you tried out for a team or maybe you tried out for a play, and it's like in the midst of that time between the time you tried out to the time that they post the results, it is just like painful. Why? Because you have to wait, and you're at the mercy of somebody else, and we become impatient in those times. But not only do we become impatient, that impatience almost stirs into fear. Where we begin to make up stories in our mind about why we're waiting. Where it's like, man, you begin to go over all of the tests, like the questions that you had on the ACT, and you're like, well, I answered this, and maybe I don't feel like I did it. And you're like looking up all the stats and all that stuff, and you're like, I probably made a 10 on the ACT. That's what I did. And then maybe you tried out for a team or for a play, and then you're in your mind, you're just making up stories about how the director or the coach is just like, they were kind of smiling on the outside, but they're secretly making fun of you on the inside by how bad you're doing. And it's this thing that when we're waiting, we become impatient, then we become fearful. And if we just dug a little bit deeper in on that like space in our life, all of that emotion on the waiting and the impatience and the fear, all of it is rooted in our lack of trust. And it's when we're in that place of where we're not trusting something or we're not trusting somebody that we just say, you know what? I'm going to figure this thing out on my own. You begin to believe this lie in some cases that you just got to work for yourself. You got to do it. Nobody's going to care for you, so you got to care for yourself. You got to make it for your way. You got to make your own way because nobody's making a way for you. You just got to do it on your own because nobody else is for you. And students, this is exactly where we find this group of people called the Israelites in Exodus 32. Because here's the thing, is that there was this group of people, and they had lived in this place called Egypt. And they had lived there for 400 years, and when they moved there, everything was awesome. I mean, it was the best. I mean, they were fruitful, and they multiplied, and their nation began to grow, and they had hundreds of thousands of people, and even more than that. And so many people called themselves Israelites. But not only that, not only were they fruitful and multiplied, everything is going really good for them, God looks down on them and says, you are my chosen people. Now, that's pretty cool. Like when God says, hey, I'm going to be your God and you are going to be my people. And so for this group of people, everything was awesome until it wasn't. Because there was this king, the king of like Egypt or Pharaoh, realized how blessed this group of people were. And he was like, man, we've got to do something about this. And so he then puts these people into slavery. And he makes their lives horrible. He makes their lives bitter. And then what happens through a miraculous wonder of God, God removes this group of people, his chosen people, from slavery, points them to the promised land in the craziest set of circumstances. And we find them wandering in the wilderness, but they're not just wandering around for nothing. No, God has pointed them in a direction called the promised land. And so what we have is this group of people, they've been given an identity. They've been called God's chosen people. But not only that, they have been like given a direction that they are going somewhere. And what happens in the midst of all of that for them, they like find themselves at the foot of this little mountain. It's called Mount Sinai. And because they've kind of lived in this particular culture for like 400 years, God is like, hey, we need to redefine our relationship. And so he uses this word called covenant. And then like at the foot of this mountain at Mount Sinai, something just miraculous happens. And this is before Exodus 32, but this is what it says. It says, on the morning of the third day, there were thunders and lightnings and a thick cloud on the mountain and a very loud trumpet blast, so that all the people in the camp trembled. Then Moses, who was the leader of the Israelites, brought the people, or the people of Israel, out of the camp to meet God. And they took their stand at the foot of the mountain. Now, Mount Sinai, get this, was wrapped in smoke because the Lord had descended on it in fire. The smoke of it went up like smoke of a kiln, and the whole mountain trembled greatly. And as the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder, Moses spoke, and God answered him in thunder. The Lord came down on Mount Sinai to the top of the mountain, and the Lord called Moses to the top of the mountain to meet, and Moses went up. So what we see, this is what we have. We have a group of people, an entire nation of people at the foot of Mount Sinai. And God descends on the mountain right there in front of them. And I haven't said this yet, or in any of the times I've been working through this, but the picture I have in my mind is a picture of Pinnacle Mountain and just sitting at the bottom of it and looking up and seeing just smoke wrapping it around all the way around. And there's fire and there's thunder and there's lightning all right there. And they, the people of Israel are sitting right there and they're looking at the wonder of the presence of God. It's right there in front of them. They can see it right there. Not only did they see it, they felt it. It said that the mountain, what did it do? It trembled. And they heard it. They heard the trumpet blast. And then Moses calls out to God, and God answers back in thunder. You're going to have to change your loincloths if that happens here. You know what I'm saying? That's the big deal. The presence of God is right there in front of them. It's right there. And so because Moses is called up to the mountain to get this new terms of this thing called the covenant, he goes up 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, 6 days, a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, nothing. They don't hear from Moses. They don't know what's going on. 5 weeks, 6 weeks is where we find them. And still Moses has not come back down from the mountain. And what begins to happen to the Israelites? All that excitement, all of that zeal from being set free from slavery and being led by God into the wilderness by a pillar of fire and a cloud and crazy stuff like that. And they were hungry and just like bread just kind of popped up everywhere on the ground in the morning. That's a crazy thing. And then the presence of God is right there in front of them. And all of that excitement and all of that zeal and all of that zest that they have for the Lord begins to wane. Why? Because they have to wait. And they're waiting, and they're waiting, and they're waiting. And then what happens? They become impatient. And that impatience then turns to fear. Why do they have that? Because they don't trust God, who has called them his people. So what do? They make their own way. They try to figure this thing out on their own. And this is what happens. So when the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people gathered themselves to Aaron, who was Moses' right-hand guy, and said to him, "Up, make us gods who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him." Students, the presence of God is right there on the mountain. It is right in front of them. And they're like, 6 weeks later, I don't know. We don't know what happened to Moses. We don't know what's going on. And so they begin to forget who they are. They forget who's right there on the mountain in front of them. They forget that they are God's chosen people. Now, sorry about that. You would think that somebody, perhaps the second in command, perhaps Aaron, would be like, "Oh man, it's only been kind of 6 weeks and the presence of God is kind of right there. We've seen some crazy stuff over the last couple years. Have we not? Maybe we can just kind of press the brakes on this whole make gods for ourselves and maybe we just wait just a little bit longer." But that's not what happens. This is what happens. So Aaron said to them, "Take off your rings of gold that are in your ears of your wives and of your sons and of your daughters and bring them to me." So all the people took off the rings of gold that were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. And he received the gold from their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool and made a golden calf. And they said, this is the people of Israel, God's chosen people. This is what they say. "These are the gods. These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt." Not only did they forget who they are, God's chosen people, They didn't forget kind of where they came from, but they certainly forgot who brought them out of where they came from. And they certainly forgot where they were going. They forgot who they are. They forgot whose they are. They forgot where they came from and where they're going. And the presence of God is right there in front of them. They can see it. They felt it. They experienced it. But they missed it. Now, before we think these Israelites are just stupid or silly or whatever, maybe we just need to take a step back for a second. Because I want to take us even further back to the very beginning of the Bible, to the first sentence of the Bible, and this is what it says. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, a couple years ago, my wife and I, we were going to go on a trip. And we had a friend of ours kind of suggest, kind of do this thing. But we were flying into San Francisco, and we wanted to end up in LA. And so our friend was like, hey, if you fly into San Francisco, there's a road that connects San Francisco and LA, and it's called the Pacific Coast Highway. And you can go down this road, and it is like right on the coast. And so what it is if you go south on the Pacific Coast Highway, which is the farthest west highway that there is on the continental United States. If you drive south down it, so from San Francisco to LA, on your left is going to be like earth, right? It's going to be like land. It's going to be like cliffs and trees and stuff like that. But if you look to your right, there is a vast Pacific Ocean. And there's like cliffs and there's beaches, and it is the most beautiful thing. Actually, it kind of started, at the beginning of our trip, kind of looked like this. So we started the Golden Gate Bridge right there. And so you can see, this was taken on like an iPhone 6. So like it was really pretty, you know what I'm saying? And so we started here, and then as we made our way down, this is what we saw. And then this is what we saw. And then this is what we saw. Just some of the most beautiful creation that you can see. For miles and miles and miles, we are in the creation that we're in God's creation of land and water and ocean. And it was so incredibly beautiful. But right between San Francisco and LA, there was this little bitty town called Big Sur. And Big Sur, is like this huge redwoods forest all in it. And we rented this little bitty cabin, this one-room cabin, and we spent the night there in the midst of this redwood forest. And there was this, they were like, hey, look, there's this beach in Big Sur that it's got a waterfall that goes right on it. You saw a picture of it just a second ago. It's just the most beautiful thing. It was the most beautiful trip. And so in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. He created this. It says that he kind of formed the world as we know it. He created light and he created dark. It says that he called it day and night. And then he created the sun, and that was going to determine the day, and the moon, that was going to determine night. And then he created the land, and he created the waters, and he separated them. And then he created the plants and the trees that we see. Then he created the birds of the air and the fish that swim in the ocean and the waters that we know of. But he didn't stop there, no. Then he created livestock, and he created animals. And then he created you and me. He created us as people in his image, kind of like that we were his chosen people with his fingerprint on us, created in his image. But even in the midst of God creating that, as we see in the Genesis narrative in Genesis chapter 1, God did create the heavens and the earth and the land and the water and the sky and all of that. But even in the midst of that, we have to understand that God created more than just that. Because in the midst of all of that, God created, and this even says it in the Bible, God created plants and trees to create fruit and vegetables. But he didn't create it like just like, hey, there's going to be a fruit or a veggie and then that's it. No, he created them with seeds. And a lot of times we think seeds are just a nuisance, but think about what seeds are. They make the things that trees produce replenishable. Like God created the world to sustain itself. And he gave animals and people just the command to be fruitful and multiply so that we could sustain the world. Not only that, though, like God created all of those things, but even in the midst of that, God created movement. He created the planets in motion. So God created movement. But not only that, God created stillness. And God created dynamics. And God created creativity so that we could have culture, that we could enjoy art, that we could enjoy music. God created us as people with this thing in our head called a brain so that we could know knowledge and so that we could actually be creative the way that he is creative. And so even the shoes that you are wearing right now are a result of somebody's creativity, which was a result of God's creativity. Are you with me? And the sports that you play came from somebody's brain because they're creative, but that creativity found its beginning in God's creativity. And the clothes that you are wearing and the building that we are in and the architecture that we know of and everything that we see and everything that we experience come from God. Like everything that you experience and everything that you know all found its beginning in God. And everything that we see all reveal or point to a creator. It's a creator that we can't see, but we can see him in all of his creation. In fact, Romans chapter 1 puts it this way. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. And so what this is saying is like everything that you see and everything that you experience point to or reveal God. Everything that you are involved in and everything that you're experiencing comes from God. And it reveals a God that we cannot see. But we miss it every single day. The wonder of the presence of God, even though for the Israelites it was right there on the mountain, it is everywhere for us. But we miss it. A couple years ago when I was in college, I was dating this girl who is now my wife, and she is awesome. But we dated in high school and then through college, and then I think got married. But by the time we were in college, we had been dating, 4 or 5 years at the time, I don't know. And I had driven to her house, a 250,000 times probably, I don't know. And so I'd been there time and time and time again. I could get there from anywhere. Like I really could. I know where her house is. I know what it looks like. I've been there. And but this particular time, I was driving and I was doing something that you should never do. You really shouldn't. And the implications of what I was doing are very big. I was texting and driving. And you shouldn't do that. And I've had friends that have passed away in car wrecks because they were texting and driving. I'm telling you, do not do that. The implications are too huge. But for the sake of the story, driving, texting. So I'm driving and I'm looking down and I'm on her street and I keep driving and I keep driving and I keep driving and I look up and I realize that I have passed her house. I've driven there so many times, but I've passed her house. And I slam on my brakes and I look back and Allison's standing in the driveway with her arms crossed. And she's like, I can't. She saw me drive past her house, texting on my phone. And that's a big deal. We know, we hear it all the time. Do not text and drive. Why? Because it is a big deal. But the reason I missed her house was because I was distracted. The reason I missed her house is because I was doing something else. There was something way more important in front of me, but I was distracted. Students, we walk through our lives distracted. We walk through our lives distracted. We are so inwardly focused on ourselves, focused on our own thing, or we're focused on the social media that we have, our TikToks or our Instagram, that we cannot see the wonder of the presence of God all around us. We can't experience music as it was created by God because we are so incredibly self-centered and self-focused. We can't experience culture as the good part of culture because we're so inwardly focused. We cannot experience fresh air because we are so distracted. We can't look at a tree and just say, look at that. This one time I was in this D group with this guy and he was like, man, have you ever thought about apples? I'm like, no, never. He was like, God created this apple. And he took a bite of it. And he was like, how cool is that? I'm like, it's not. Like, it's not cool to me. And he was like, this is so amazing. I get it now because that is a wonder of the presence of God right there. And everything that we see and everything that we experience point to God, but we miss it. But just because maybe you came into this weekend missing the wonder of the presence of God does not mean that you have to continue to live that way. There's this passage in 2 Corinthians 3. This is what it says. For those who are Christ followers, who claim Jesus as Savior and as Lord, it says this, and we all, with unveiled face, beholding the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image from one degree of glory to another. For this comes from the Lord, who is the Spirit. Very simply, if we just begin to look around, we walk out and we feel the cold and we look at the fire and we see these trees and maybe we eat food and all of this, all that points to God and reveals God, and everything that we see and experience points to God. And if we just begin to look around and we begin to see these different things, we're beholding the wonder of the presence of God, and it is right in front of us. And what's going to happen is you're going to begin to realize that God is not some distant or dormant God that spun the world into creation and then walked away. No, God is very much involved in our every moment and our every minute of every single day. He knows you deeply. He knows who you are. He is a personal God. He is not some golden calf that we make up. He is not that. He is very personal, and he knows you. In fact, some people would say that maybe he has even chosen you. And he calls you his own. He calls you his children. And so once we begin to look around and we see, we're beholding the wonder of the presence of God all around us, we're going to realize that God has called us his own, but we're also going to realize that God is pointing us in a direction. The passage says that when we behold God, he's going to begin to transform us from one degree of glory to another. In other words, he's gonna take us from one step. He's gonna form in us. He's gonna form our hearts. He's gonna shape our hearts. He's gonna chisel the things out of us that need to be gone. He's gonna root sin out of us so that we would look more and more like his son, Jesus. And so when we behold God, we realize that he calls us his own and that he's pointing us in a direction. Very simply, when we wonder at God, God's gonna begin to do a wonder in us. When we wonder at God, he is going to begin to do a wonder in us. So I asked you at the beginning of this talk, and I asked your leaders during a leader meeting, and I've been asking our staff for the last couple of weeks the same question. Are you ready? Our staff at the Cabot campus has been feeling just the Lord stirring something in us that we would he's calling us to pray more. It's kind of what we've been feeling. That he's just calling us to pray more, pray bigger prayers, pray more like out of this crazy world, like prayers, like all of that stuff, like just nuts type of stuff. And so he's also called us to pray like for a longer amount of time. And so we've been doing that, and it's looked a little bit different. But last week on Thursday, I felt the Lord say, hey man, 3:00 today, we're going to be praying. And so our entire staff pretty much had the flu, except for me and this other guy. And so it was our worship pastor named Dalton. And I said, hey, Dalton, I feel like the Lord's been calling me to pray today. And he said, all right, man, well, dude, let's do it at 3. And so I said, dude, if you bring a couple songs, we'll worship and we'll pray. And he's like, where do you want to do it? And I was like, well, we'll do it in our plaza. And in our plaza, there's these huge, huge big windows that look out on the street where our church is. And so at 3 o'clock, we went there, and we had said, hey, we're going to be about an hour. That's kind of what we're going to do. And so we just began to sing and worship and really behold the presence of God and wonder at God and praying for this weekend and praying for our city and our people, that people would be saved, that just miraculous things would happen. And then he prayed this incredibly specific prayer. And he prayed this, Dalton did. He said, Lord, would you just miraculously just draw people to our church? Like, would the presence of God be so radiant from our church that people would just be like, they would drive by and they would have no idea why, but they would just pull into our church and come talk to somebody. What's a little weird is that I had been praying that exact same prayer for the last couple of weeks. I mean, how specific is that, right? And so we're there, we're praying and we're singing and we're worshiping, and that happens, and we're about 50 minutes into this, and we've been praying that people would just be drawn to our church. About 50 minutes in, I look up out of our window, and we both kind of felt like the Lord just told us to stop. I look up, and there's a lady that had just pulled in, was walking to the door. They were fixing something on her car. She came in and she said, hey, who's the pastor here? I want to know service times, and we were able to pray with her. Well, won't he do it? You know what I'm saying? Like holy cow. It's like, man, we pray, we behold the presence of God, and he begins to do a wonder in us. What happens when God actually answers your prayers? You know what I'm saying? I'm asking you, are you ready to experience the wonder of the presence of God? Are you ready? Are you ready? And so yesterday, I told our team, I was like, hey, we'll be praying at 3. We're just going to be worshiping Jesus. We're going to be praying. And Dalton, again, prays that same prayer. God, would you just miraculously bring people into our church? Middle of our prayer, a guy pulls in to our church. And it come to find out that this is one of our staff members, family members, who we have specifically prayed for by name, who doesn't know Jesus. Won't he do it? Do you know what I'm saying? Are you ready, students, to experience the wonder of the presence of God? Because when we begin to behold God, when we begin to wonder at God, he is going to begin to do a wonder in you, and he's going to begin to do a wonder around you. So if you're ready, let's do it. Let's pray. God, we bless your name. God, we just come before you right now and say that we are ready. Collectively, as Winterchill 2020, we say we are ready to experience your presence. We are ready to behold you, to sing the gospel, to remind ourselves of how you have saved us. God, we are ready for you. And so, God, would you meet us in this place? We invite you here. We know that you're here already, but we just invite you to come make your name known. God, would we experience the wonder of the presence of God this weekend? God, would we not miss the wonder of the presence of God as we begin to behold you? God, would you begin to transform us to one degree of glory to another? God, we bless your name and we love you. It's in Jesus' name, amen.